They were auctioning off a widow and her baby. Yes, you heard that right. Human lives sold like cattle. But when one cowboy stepped forward, no one expected what happened next. If you love stories of courage, love and redemption, stay till the end. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Legend of West for more powerful tales like this one. The dusty wind blew across the small frontier town of Dry Creek, carrying whispers of injustice and sorrow. The sun was high, scorching the wooden roofs, and yet all eyes were fixed on the town's auction platform. A woman stood there, clutching her baby close to her chest. Her name was Clara Mayfield, once the wife of a farmer, now a widow. Her husband had died defending his land from bandits, and with no one left to help, debt swallowed everything she owned. Now, she and her infant were being sold by the same townsfolk who once called her neighbor. A crowd gathered, miners, ranchers, drifters, all watching as the auctioneer shouted, "Who'll start the bid for the widow and her child? She's strong, can cook, clean, work the fields. The baby's just a bonus." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's heart broke a little more. She hugged her baby tighter, whispering, "Don't cry, my little one. Mama's here." From the far edge of town, a lone rider approached. Dust rose behind his horse, boots and hat worn from long miles. His name was Colt Remington, a cowboy with a past nobody dared to mention. Some said he was an outlaw turned wanderer. Others whispered he was a man searching for redemption. He reined in his horse as he saw the crowd. Something about that woman, her trembling hands, her courage to stand tall even in shame, struck him deep. What kind of town sells a mother and child? He muttered under his breath. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. "Let's start at $50. A gruff rancher raised his hand. "50! Another voice called. "60! Then a third man smirked. "75! The woman looks healthy enough." The laughter again. The sound of cruelty burned Colt's soul. He clenched his fists, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the platform. Clara looked down, refusing to meet the men's stares. She could feel her dignity slipping away with every shout. Her baby whimpered, sensing her fear. Just as the auctioneer lifted the gavel again, a calm but firm voice echoed through the air. $500. The crowd went silent. Heads turned. The cowboy had stepped forward, hat low, eyes burning with purpose. The auctioneer blinked. "Did I hear that right, mister?" Colt nodded slowly. $500. For the woman and her child. Murmurs broke out among the crowd. "Who is he? Never seen him before. Must be crazy." Clara lifted her gaze for the first time. Their eyes met, her tearful and afraid, his steady and strong. For a moment the world around them vanished. The auctioneer grinned greedily. "Sold to the gentleman for $500. The gavel hit the wood with a sharp crack. Colt walked up the steps, took off his hat, and gently said, "Ma'am, you're free now." Clara could barely speak. Why would you do this for me?" He looked at her baby, then back at her. "Because no one deserves to be sold. Not in my sight." The townsfolk whispered as the cowboy led her off the stage. But behind their whispers, eyes of anger began to burn. Men who didn't like their business being interrupted. And one man in particular, the local sheriff, who had plans for that widow himself. As Colt helped Clara onto his horse, he felt those stares. He knew trouble was coming. But for now, as the baby's small hand gripped his finger, he knew he'd made the right choice. And somewhere deep in his heart, he felt a fire rekindling, the kind only justice and love can ignite. The sun dipped low behind the mountains as Colt Remington led his horse through the quiet valley. Clara Mayfield held her baby close, her eyes darting between the cowboy and the distant glow of Dry Creek fading behind them. For the first time in months, she wasn't surrounded by cruelty, but by silence. And hope. Colt stopped by a small creek and said softly, "We'll rest here tonight. You and the little one need it." Clara hesitated. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "The sheriff, he won't let this go." Colt looked into the fire he was building, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. "I've faced worse than sheriffs," he said, "but I couldn't ride away and leave you there." "No decent man could." Clara looked down at her baby, whose tiny hand reached for the warmth of the flames. "No decent man ever came before," she said quietly. "Until you." A long silence followed, the kind that speaks louder than words. Back in town, Sheriff Wade Carver slammed his fist on the table inside the saloon. "That cowboy humiliated us in front of the whole town," he growled. Beside him, Hank Barlow, the rancher who had bid $75 for Clara, spat tobacco into a tin. "Word is he's heading south. I say we ride out tonight and teach him what happens to heroes." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Do it quietly. Bring the woman back. And if the cowboy resists, bury him where the coyotes howl." The men nodded. Boots thudded against the floorboards as they left, spurs jingling like the promise of death. Meanwhile, out by the creek, the wind whispered through the tall grass. Clara sat beside the fire, humming a lullaby. Colt watched from a short distance, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: peace. But peace never lasted long in the West. "You don't talk much," Clara said softly. "Talking never fixed anything," Colt replied. She smiled faintly. "Then why did you help me?" Colt looked up at the stars. "Because once I had someone who needed saving. I failed her. Maybe helping you is my way of making it right." Clara didn't ask more. The pain in his voice said enough. The baby stirred and she held him closer. "His name's Jacob," she said with pride. Colt smiled slightly. "Jacob's a strong name. He'll grow up knowing his mama's braver than any man I've met." Suddenly, a snap of twigs echoed through the dark. Colt's hand shot to his revolver. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Stay close to the fire. Don't move." Out from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, then another, then three more. The sheriff's men had found them. "Evening, cowboy," Hank Barlow sneered. "Sheriff says that woman's property of the town. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you live." Colt's jaw tightened. "You tell your sheriff the woman's free, and if he's got a problem, he can say it to my face." The men laughed. One cocked his rifle. "Suit yourself." A shot rang out, missing Colt by inches. Colt fired back. The night exploded in chaos, gunfire flashing in the dark, horses screaming and the baby crying in terror. Clara shielded Jacob with her body, whispering prayers through tears. Colt dove behind a fallen log, reloading fast, moving like a man born for gunfire. Two attackers went down before the rest realized they were outmatched. Hank crawled behind a boulder, shouting, "You can't win, cowboy! The sheriff will send the whole town after you." Colt called back, "Then tell him to bring 'em all." A final shot echoed, and silence followed. The surviving men rode off into the night, leaving the dead behind. Colt holstered his revolver, breathing hard. Smoke drifted through the trees as he walked back to the fire. Clara looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "You risked your life for us again," she whispered. "I told you," Colt said softly. "I don't walk away from people in trouble." Jacob whimpered, and Colt gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "We'll find a safe place," he promised. "I know someone who owes me a favor, far from Dry Creek." Clara nodded, though fear still lingered in her heart. Somewhere out there, she knew the sheriff wasn't done. The sun broke over the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Colt Remington tightened the saddle on his horse, while Clara wrapped baby Jacob in a wool blanket. They had ridden all night after the gunfight, hoping to reach Silver Rock, a small mining town 2 days south, a place where no one knew them and no one cared. But Colt knew deep inside, the sheriff would never stop. "You think we're safe?" Clara asked quietly. Colt shook his head. "Not yet. Sheriff Carver's got pride. A man like that don't rest until he's spilled blood." Clara looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why are you risking your life for me, Colt? You don't even know us." He stopped, looking toward the horizon. "Because I've seen what happens when good men stay silent. My brother once did, and it cost him his soul. Meanwhile, back in Dry Creek, the sheriff was gathering his men. His rage burned hotter than the desert sun. "That cowboy made a fool of me," he snarled. "He thinks he can just ride off with what's mine. We'll show him what justice looks like in Dry Creek." A bounty poster was nailed to the saloon wall. "Wanted, Colt Remington, dead or alive." A reward of $1,000, enough to make every gunman in 3 counties saddle up. By the second night, Colt and Clara reached an old abandoned cabin near a ridge. It was small but safe enough for the moment. Inside, Clara set Jacob on a blanket and whispered, "He's finally asleep." Colt sat by the window, revolver on his knee, eyes watching the moonlit valley. The silence was heavy, the kind that always comes before danger. "You ever think about going back east?" Clara asked softly. "To start fresh?" Colt smiled faintly. "Never belonged anywhere long enough to start fresh. Maybe this is my start, protecting you and the boy." Clara's eyes softened. "You're a good man, Colt, my husband. He would have thanked you." Colt looked down. "Maybe one day." "You'll stop thanking me when you realize what following me brings," she frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the distant echo of hooves shattered the quiet night. Colt stood instantly, grabbed his rifle, and looked out the window. Torchlights flickered in the valley, a dozen riders closing fast. "They found us," he said grimly. "Sheriff's men." Clara's breath caught. "What do we do?" "We fight, or we run, but I ain't letting them take you." He quickly saddled the horse, lifted Clara up with Jacob in her arms, and said, "Ride south through the canyon. Follow the stars till you see water. Don't stop for nothing. I'll hold them off." Tears welled in her eyes. "No, I'm not leaving you." Colt touched her hand gently. "You have to. The world needs you more than it needs me." Their eyes met for a long, silent moment, the kind where 1,000 unspoken words pass in a single heartbeat. Then, with a hard breath, he slapped the reins, and the horse bolted into the darkness. Moments later, the sheriff and his posse arrived, surrounding the cabin. The sheriff called out, "Remington, you got 2 choices. Come out and die quick, or stay in there and burn." Colt stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, moonlight catching the edge of his hat. "Ain't much of a choice, Sheriff." The sheriff grinned coldly. "You should have minded your own business, cowboy." "A man's business is doing what's right," Colt replied. "You sold a mother and child like cattle. You think that's justice?" "Justice is what I say it is," the sheriff growled, cocking his gun. "Now die for it." Gunfire exploded. Bullets tore through wood and dust. Colt rolled behind a wagon, firing back fast and true. 2 of the sheriff's men fell before the others scattered for cover. Smoke filled the air. The sheriff cursed. "Burn him out!" and torches flew. Flames licked the cabin walls. The fire roared, sparks flying into the black sky. Colt ran through the smoke, coughing, eyes stinging, until a bullet hit his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The sheriff stepped closer, revolver drawn. "Any last words, hero?" Colt, bleeding but smiling faintly, muttered, "Yeah, you'll never find her." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "She won't get far." But before he could shoot, a gunshot cracked through the air, not Colt's. The sheriff's hat flew off his head. He spun around in shock. From the darkness, Clara stood, holding Colt's spare revolver, trembling but steady. "You won't touch him," she said fiercely. Flames roared through the night, painting the desert sky orange and gold. The air was thick with smoke, and every breath burned like fire. Sheriff Wade Carver stared in disbelief. The woman he had once planned to sell was now pointing a gun straight at him. Clara Mayfield's hands trembled, but her eyes burned with a strength he'd never seen. Behind her, Colt Remington lay wounded, his shirt soaked in blood, struggling to stay conscious. "Put the gun down." "Ma'am," the sheriff sneered, taking a slow step forward. "You don't have it in you." Clara's finger shook on the trigger. Her voice cracked, but she stood firm. "You're wrong. I've got more to lose than you ever had." For a second, the world went still. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then the sheriff drew, a flash, A shot, a scream. The sheriff stumbled back, clutching his chest. His gun slipped from his fingers, landing in the dirt. He looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief, then fell to his knees. Clara's hand dropped the revolver. Her body trembled as she stared at the man she'd just killed. Colt pushed himself up, wincing in pain. You did it, he whispered. Tears streamed down her face. I didn't want to, but I had to. Colt managed a weak smile. You saved us, Clara. You saved your boy. The sheriff's men, seeing their leader fall, turned and fled into the night. The fire crackled around them, slowly dying down as the wind shifted east. Colt leaned against the broken wagon, blood running down his arm. We gotta move before the rest come back. Clara nodded, helping him to his feet. You're losing too much blood. Let me help you, he smiled faintly. You already did. Hours later, dawn broke across the valley. The smoke had faded, and the world was quiet again. Clara and Colt sat by a stream miles from the burning cabin. The baby, Jacob, slept peacefully in her arms. Colt's wound was bandaged, but he was pale, his strength fading. Clara knelt beside him. Stay with me, Colt, please. He looked at her, his voice soft, raspy. You and the boy. You gave me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. What's that? She asked, tears filling her eyes. A reason to fight, and someone worth fighting for. She grabbed his hand, pressing it to her heart. You'll see him grow up, Colt, I promise you. He smiled, weak but warm. Tell him. Tell Jacob his mama's the bravest soul in the West, and that his old friend Colt did right by her. Her tears fell on his hand. Don't say goodbye, she whispered, but Colt's gaze drifted toward the sunrise, that endless horizon he'd always chased. A soft smile crossed his face. Looks like the storm's finally over. And then, silence. Clara clutched his hand, her sobs echoing through the empty canyon. The wind carried them far across the desert, a mourning song for the man who had given everything to protect her. Weeks later, in the small town of Silver Rock, a woman walked into a church with her baby. She wore a simple dress and a small, worn cowboy hat, the same one that once belonged to Colt Remington. She knelt before the altar and whispered, He saved us, Lord, and I'll make sure the world remembers him. Outside the church, a wooden marker stood near the hill. Carved into it were simple words. Colt Remington, a man who stood for what was right. Clara placed a wildflower beside it, her son in her arms. The wind blew softly, as if the West itself was saying goodbye. Rest easy, cowboy, she whispered. Your story won't be forgotten. She turned and walked away toward the horizon, her son's tiny hand gripping the brim of Colt's hat, and for a moment, in the golden light, she could almost see him riding beside her, smiling, free at last. Some heroes don't wear badges or make speeches. Some just do what's right and leave behind a story that never dies. This was the tale of Colt Remington, the cowboy who saved a widow and her baby. If this story touched your heart, like this video, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe to Legend of West for more stories where courage, love and sacrifice ride together into the sunset.